It's a delight to see each of you here tonight, and certainly a pleasure for me to be with you and to have the chance to engage in these Bible studies with you. It's a joy to me, and I'm sure to you as well, to study the Bible and even to worship in our private individual lives from day to day, but it is a special treat to get to do those things together. And I'm pleased, as I'm sure you are, about the fact that the Lord has designed this thing so that a part of it is together. Not just what we do individually, but there's a together aspect of being a Christian. We're enjoying some of the together parts of being in Christ this week. Well, in our little series of lessons on letting our light shine, we want tonight to talk about being honest, the importance of being very honest, scrupulously honest in the way we live and in the way we speak and in all that we do. Not just because it's right to do that, but because that's one way that we can have an influence on other people. We certainly live in days when dishonesty has become a huge problem. Dishonesty is an epidemic in our society. It has become almost the norm for people to believe that certain forms of dishonesty are to be expected. Normal people will find it necessary from time to time to do or act less than honestly. And we live in that kind of an environment. It's hard for that not to rub off on us. We find it easy to be less than honest because that's just the way life is. But we need to do better than that. If we are the people of the Lord, if we have it in our minds that what we want to do is to be the Lord's reverent people in our generation, as in any generation, then we're going to need from time to time to be what Paul talked about in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 15 when he described the Lord's people as lights shining in a dark world. And the darker the world is, the bigger the contrast there needs to be between the way we are and the way that average people are around us. It is in darkness that light shines. And I don't know of any better opportunity that we have in the days in which we live to be a shining light in a dark world than to practice real, true honesty in all of our dealings. Certainly being honest is a part of being a godly person. I'm not so sure, but what it's one of the main parts of it. If you think about the characteristics of God, there's not anything any more essential to the character of God than truth. It's about as close to the bullseye as you can get if you were trying to describe God. God is a God of truth. And when you think about that a little bit further, it becomes obvious that where the human race began to run off of the track in the Garden of Eden was when it began to act on the basis of untruth. When Adam and Eve believed a lie that had been told to them by the devil, and on the basis of that lie, they transgressed God's will, there's an argument that can be made that every bad thing that has happened in the world since that first transgression in the Garden of Eden has come as a result of some kind of untruth being propagated in the world. If God is going to fix that problem, there's going to be some solution to the problem of sin, we wouldn't be surprised, would we, that truth has got to be put back in the place where it always should have been. The truth is going to be at the very heart of what God is trying to do in this wicked world to repair the damage of sin. And He's not going to repair it in this world. He's working out an eternal repair, a solution that's going to reach out beyond the bounds of this world. But because truth is such an integral part of God's character, and we live in such an untruthful world, we need to understand that if we have any hope of being godly people in this world, if we're going to be God-like or Christ-like in any significant way, then we're going to have to be people who come back to the old-fashioned idea of telling the truth and acting on the basis of truth. Paul says in Titus chapter 1 and verse 2 that God cannot lie. God would have to be someone other than God to say anything less than that which was true. And we take that for granted, don't we? That God can always be counted on to tell the truth. But that's a very important fact. You need to understand that the reason you can trust God is because God does tell the truth all the time. Even in our human relationships, we understand that truth-telling is the main reason why you trust somebody. You don't trust somebody if you've experienced that they don't always shoot straight with you, they don't always tell the truth, and sometimes they will act dishonestly. That's what causes you to mistrust somebody. And the reason why we can depend upon God, we can count on Him, we don't ever have to worry that He will betray us or treat us in any kind of treacherous way. The reason we can have that kind of faith in God is because He's a God of truth. If you ever had any slight doubt in your mind that God would tell the truth or would do the truth, then you couldn't trust God the way that we have the privilege of doing. You know, there's not, even in our English language, there's not a lot of difference between the word trust and the word truth. You know anything about the history of the English language, both of those words come from the same root. And so God tells the truth so we can trust Him. The reason we can trust Him is because He tells the truth. Jesus is described in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 14 as the faithful and true witness. Jesus comes into the world and He's going to tell us what God is like. He's going to tell us about things in the heavenly realm that we can't check out for ourselves directly. We need to depend on the fact that if He's going to tell us about something, then we're going to have to take His word for that being true. We need Him to be a faithful and true witness. We need Him to accurately represent the truth about things that He knows about that we don't know about, and we're going to have to take His testimony for those things. And so not only God the Father is a God of truth, but Jesus came into the world to bear witness to the truth, much of which truth we can't verify for ourselves right now, and we've got to decide if we're going to take His word for it or not. He claimed to never have misrepresented God in any kind of a way. That everything Jesus ever said about God, or God's plans, or God's purposes, was absolutely true. So Peter encourages us in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 22 to follow the example of Jesus, and he said, no guile was ever found in the mouth of Jesus. What is guile? Well, guile is not just dishonesty, it's dishonesty usually with the intent to try to trick somebody or take advantage of them. Well, Jesus never did that. He never told anybody anything that wasn't true. He never tried to do anybody harm by tricking them or lying to them. Guile was never found in His mouth, even though it cost Him His life. When He stood before Pilate and had a chance to save His own neck by saying, no, I never claimed to be the king of Israel. Those people are just misrepresenting me. What did He say? He confessed the truth. Even though He knew it was going to cost Him His life, He acknowledged, yes, that is the truth. I am the king. And so they put Him to death, but He never used any kind of trickery or deceit or scheming for any kind of selfish purpose. He always told the truth, even at great cost. And if we're going to be Christ-like, that's what we want to be, isn't it? To be like Christ, then we're going to have to be people of the truth. You remember the story in Acts chapter 5 of Ananias and Sapphira? Those early days of the church in Jerusalem when some were selling property to raise money to help the poor and the needy among them. There was a certain couple named Ananias and Sapphira who sold some property they had, and they brought a part of the money that they had raised and laid it at the apostles' feet and donated that to the fund from which the poor were being cared for. What was wrong with that was that apparently they misrepresented the amount of money. They implied or said that was all that they had received from the sale of the property, when in fact that wasn't true. That was only a part of it. As Peter later said, they didn't even have to sell it. That was their choice. They could have kept it. And having sold it, if they hadn't lied and said that was all they received, that would have been different. But they tried to get more credit for their deed than was due. They tried to make themselves look more generous than they really were, and they used lying to try to accomplish that, and they were punished for it very severely, weren't they? Verse 3, Peter said, Ananias, Why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? That is, to try to lie. You can't successfully lie to the Holy Spirit, but they had tried, and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. I want you to think about what that passage helps us to understand. Any lie that we tell, any dishonesty that we engage in, always involves God. Even if it's a lie you tell to another human being, that always involves God. Ananias and Sapphira didn't set out to say, let's see if we can trick God. Let's lie to God. No, they saw themselves as lying to their fellow Christians. But Peter points out that really what they were doing was lying to God. And that's really the way it always is. Every lie that's ever been told has involved somebody's relationship to God. Certainly we can't successfully lie to God because He always knows the truth. There's no tricking Him. But neither can we lie to anybody else without God's knowledge. God knows whether we're telling the truth or not. And when we try to lie, even to another human being, we're trying to pull a fast one on God Himself, and that can't be done. And so lying is a sinful act, not only because it takes advantage of another human being, but because it commits an act of injustice against God. You know, I said a minute ago that truth is at the heart of God's character. What's at the heart of the devil's character? Untruth. Untruth is as characteristic of the devil as truth is characteristic of God. Jesus made a very strong statement in John chapter 8 and verse 44, and talking to the Jews who were opposing Him and rejecting Him, He said, John 8 and 44, you are of your father, the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. For all I know, the demonic and angelic, fallen angel that we know of as Satan, who is the leader of all rebellion against God, he may, for all I know, have been the first personal being created by God who ever told a lie. That may have been his invention. He may have been the first creature to rebel against God by trying to tell some untruth. However that came to be, whoever it was that told the first lie, I think it probably was him, but whoever it was, this figure that we know of as Satan, he's the master of it. That's his main tool. That's his main weapon. He's never done anything that doesn't involve lying in some kind of a way. Everything he does is based upon trying to use the lie as his tool. And when you tell a lie, my friend, you never come closer to making yourself like the devil than when you lie. Because there's not anything any closer to his character than the lie. And when you lie, to that extent, you make him your father. You show that you have a kinship to him rather than to God. Does that help you understand how serious it is ever to misrepresent the truth? We need to be very careful about misrepresenting the truth, even slightly. For whatever reason we may do that, because that pushes us a little bit further in the devil's direction. That makes us partake of his character rather than God's character. So I repeat, if we're going to be godly people, we're going to have to take very seriously this matter of truth. In contrast to all lying and untruth and dishonest dealing, we need to pay attention to what Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, when he said, finally, brethren, whatever things are, what's at the first of the list? Whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there's any virtue, and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. So Philippians 4 verse 8 is a wonderful list of things that it's good to think about, to meditate upon, and what's at the top of the list? The things that are true. That's what we need to think about. That needs to fill our hearts and our minds, and when we speak or we act, it needs to be on the basis of truthful thoughts, because that's a basic part of godliness. But I want you to think with me for a moment or two about how many different kinds of dishonesty there are. You think, well, I'm an honest person. I wouldn't just deliberately lie to somebody. I'm an honest person. Well, that's a good starting point. But there are a lot of subtle ways that deceit can creep into our lives that I want you to think about. Certainly, we would start by saying that an honest person always tells the truth. That's the starting point. If you're going to say something, an honest person will try to say that which is true. In Revelation chapter 21, where there's a list of those who will have their part in the lake that burns with fire, liars are on the list. Cowardly, the unbelieving, this is Revelation 21 verse 8. The cowardly, the unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. That's a horrible list, isn't it? The cowardly, the unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, so forth. Liars are right in there. You lie, you clash yourself with people like others that are on that list. And so the basic part of honesty is, first of all, that it tells the truth. There's an interesting statement made about honesty in the 15th Psalm, which points out that the truthful person will even tell truth to himself in his thoughts. Even in our meditations, we will try to be people of truth. Psalm 15 verse 2, the tongue of the wise uses knowledge rightly, but the mouth of fools pours forth wickedness. I'm sorry, I didn't think that sounded right, and the reason was that's Proverbs 15 verse 2, which happens to also be talking about truth, coincidentally. But Psalm 15 verse 2 talks about telling truth in our own hearts. That is, being people whose own inner life is filled with truth. He who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. I want you to understand that's more important than you might think on first acquaintance with that verse. Your inner thought life is very, very important. Certainly what you say to other people is important. But where do those words come from? They come from your heart. And if you want to be a radically honest person, you need to start not first by looking at the words that you speak, but by the thoughts that you allow to reside in your heart and in your mind. A lot of us are not entirely truthful in that inner dialogue that goes on in our minds. We tell ourselves things we want to believe to be true, and we tell ourselves those things so often that we come to believe that they're true. We become self-deceived. We lie to ourselves more often than we think we do. So I would encourage you, you want an interesting experiment? Tomorrow, just monitor your thinking for a while and apply the test of honesty to your thoughts. When you find yourself thinking a thought that may be just a little bit less than true, maybe it's something you're not sure it's true, you want it to be true so much you're trying to tell yourself that it's true, or maybe it involves just a little bit of misrepresentation, try applying the acid test of truthfulness to every one of your thoughts. Think yourself thinking a thought about somebody else, for example. Say, now do I know that that's really true? I'm thinking that, but is that really true? Be as strict in monitoring the honesty of your thoughts as you are your words, and you'll become more honest person. Because that's where your words come from. It's from your thoughts. to speak a dishonest thing to somebody else, you will have first had to think that dishonest thought yourself. And so the honest person speaks the truth in his heart. But there are other aspects of honesty. Stealing really is a form of dishonesty, isn't it? Stealing is an action that's dishonest. And so Paul says in Ephesians 4, verse 28, let him who stole steal no more. One reason you need to quit stealing, if you're stealing, because that's dishonest, that's deceitful. And so stealing falls under this category of dishonesty. But not only that, a really honest person won't ever cheat anybody else or act even slightly unfairly. Won't ever fraudulently deal with somebody else. You think you never do that, you need to apply a stricter standard to yourself. Very often we try to maneuver in our dealings with other people to our own advantage. And sometimes we, however respectfully it may be and however innocent it may seem to other people, we don't deal extremely fairly with the other person. And that's a failure of honesty. A couple of weeks ago, I was in an office supply place getting some things, and one of the items that I'd got, the item was such, it was some metal bookends, and I'd gotten 2 sets of these bookends, and they fit together such that you could easily, I handed them to the sales clerk, and she grabbed them and scanned it and went to put it in the bag, and it was obvious she thought that was just one item. And when I said there were 2 of those, she looked at me like, what kind of trick are you trying to pull here? Why would anybody voluntarily agree to pay twice what they're going to just to be honest? I was trying to be honest, but it was so rare in her experience, she thought there's got to be a trick here. I don't understand why he's doing that, but it can't be right. So she almost wouldn't let me be honest. I could have easily gotten away with that. She would have never known, nobody would have ever known except the Lord, that I bought 2 of those for the price of 1. In all fairness to her, when she'd had a second or 2 to think about it, she said, thank you for being honest. Well, you see, I could have cheated her employer. I could have cheated the company that she worked for in that instance and gotten away with it as far as any other human being would have ever been concerned, but that would have been dishonest. That would have been dealing fraudulently. That would have been cheating somebody, and that's dishonest. Hypocrisy is a form of dishonesty too, isn't it? If you ever pretend to be a better person than you really are, that's a lie. Play acting is dishonest. Trying to convince somebody that you're better than you are, even if it's in an interview for a job, is dishonest. You willing to always acknowledge the full truth about who you are? You see how deep radical honesty cuts into the practical affairs of life? Anything wrong with putting your best foot forward. But if you deliberately try to hide a part of the truth of yourself to be hypocritical and to convince somebody that you're a better person than the facts warrant, that is dishonest. It's a form of lying. That's really what guile is in its truest sense. Think about this. A really honest person not only tells the truth insofar as they know, but they will make some effort to make sure that they are telling the truth, to check the facts out. We're coming to the end of a political season, and I, for one, will be immensely glad when it's over. I hope that it's over tomorrow night. My fear is that it's not going to be over tomorrow night. But I'll tell you, in the political world, so many charges get made that at best are only half-truths. It has become an epidemic in the political world to misrepresent people with half-truths and slight misrepresentations and including a little bit of the evidence but conveniently leaving another part of the evidence out. Both parties do it. Both parties do it. And it's just as dishonest on the part of one person as it is another. Before you forward that email that attacks the person that you don't want to be president, have you made sure that the allegations in that email are true. You may want them to be true. It may conveniently serve your political purposes. But if it turns out to have been a misrepresentation, you will have been a party to a lie simply because you quickly passed along something that wasn't true, and you didn't even have enough respect for the truth to try to find out if it was true before you spread it to somebody else. And that's not just true in the political realm. It's true when you're on the phone talking to somebody and are tempted to gossip about somebody, tell something that you may not know for sure is the truth. A person who's really concerned about honesty will do some fact-checking before they speak or act. They require extra effort. It does. It takes time. And you can't tell nearly as many juicy things if you stop to check the facts first. It will inhibit your conversation, I can tell you for a fact. But truthful people won't tell anything that they're not sure is the truth. A truthful person always keeps confidences. That's hard, isn't it? Somebody conveys something to you in confidence. The general rule is that you always get one exception, right? Somebody gives you something in confidence. You think that there's at least one other person that you can tell that in confidence. And then that person gets one exception. They can share that with some other one person. You must not tell anybody I told you this because this was told to me in confidence. We always think we each get one exception. And that's how gossip spreads like wildfire. Like confidence is being betrayed. How trustworthy are you in the keeping of confidences? If somebody needs to confide in you about something, are you known to be a person who can keep a confidence that it won't go beyond there even to one other person? It's a part of honesty. An honest person always keeps his word. You say you're going to do something and you don't do it, you've told a lie. You've said you were going to do something that you didn't do. You violated your trust. That it gets back to the trustworthiness of God. That's one reason you can always count on the promises of God, because when He promises something, He always carries through with His promise. He never fails to keep His word. An honest person always acts in good faith. Never has any hidden agenda. Always transparent and truthful in what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. And last but not least, I would suggest that a truthful person always has the courage to stand up for truth when truth is being misrepresented. Willing to confront dishonesty and deception and misrepresentation. Exodus chapter 23, there was the command in the law of Moses not to follow a multitude to do evil. That's easy to do, isn't it? When a bunch of people are misrepresenting somebody, it's easy to jump in and jump on the bandwagon and say, yeah, I believe that too. First thing you know, we got a lynch mob. Well, it's hard when truth is being misrepresented, and you know it's being misrepresented, but you're the only person who maybe knows the true facts. It's hard to be the one to stand up and say, now wait a minute here. I know for a fact that that's not true. And you people need to be careful about what you're doing here. That's a good way to get your head taken off. You ever tried to keep a lynch mob from doing what it was intent on doing by saying, now wait a minute. I happen to know that this man is innocent. No, you get in the way of a lynch mob, you're going to probably get hanged too, along with the person that they're setting out to hang. That was Peter's problem in the courtyard, wasn't it, when Jesus was on trial? Here, truth was being misrepresented in the ultimate way. Lies are being told about the King of Heaven, the Christ. They're going to put Him to death on false testimony, on misrepresentations, on false charges, and Peter knew the truth. But he didn't have the courage to stand up for what he knew to be the truth on that night. He denied his best friend. That's dishonesty of the worst sort. But it takes more courage than most of us have got to stand up for truth when the mob is going another direction. So you see how many different kinds of honesty there are? Somebody said when they came in tonight, what's this lesson going to be about, Brother Henry? Honesty is a simple subject. We all try to be honest. What's the big deal here? Well, there are a lot of forms of honesty. I'm not sure all of us pass the test on some of these. I know I don't. You set out to be an honest person, you've got a piece of work ahead of you in a lot of different ways where we often fall short. So being honest and being consistently honest is a challenging thing. We need to be honest, not just because, as somebody said, it's the best policy. You heard that saying? Honesty is the best policy. Well, sometimes it is. By policy, we mean that which is expedient, that which will help us attain our objectives. And in most cases, being honest will help you obtain your objectives, particularly if you're thinking about long-term objectives. And if your objective is to go to heaven, telling the truth will always help you achieve that objective. But sometimes, in the short term, honesty will cost you. In the short term, honesty won't always be the best policy. It won't be expedient if all somebody's interested in is what's going to work out best. Telling the truth sometimes doesn't always work out for the best in the short term. In the long term it does. But in the short term, sometimes honesty is counterproductive. And what I want you to understand tonight is that if a person is only honest when they believe it is good policy, but when political and policy considerations seem to indicate a little bit of dishonesty is in order, they'll shade the truth. They only tell the truth when they believe it is good policy. That's not an honest person. Honest person will tell the truth, period. Regardless of policy considerations. Regardless of expediency. They will tell the truth because it's the truth. End of discussion. This may cost me, but this is the truth. This may lose us the election, but this is the truth, and I'm going to tell it. So that saying honesty is the best policy will only carry you so far. The really honest person will tell the truth regardless of policy considerations. Psalm 15, verse 4. We were in Psalm 15 a minute ago. You remember verse 4? The blessing is pronounced on he who swears to his own hurt but does not change. That's a part of honesty. Here's a person who takes an oath. Well, let's just don't use the example of an oath. That might be controversial. Let's say a person enters into a business contract because they think it's going to make them money. But as it turns out, keeping that business contract is going to cost them money. So they start trying to wiggle out of the contract. Maybe even say, I never agreed to that contract in the first place. Acting dishonestly because honesty is going to cost. This passage pronounces a blessing upon the person who has sworn, that is, entered into a binding agreement that ends up hurting him, but he'll go ahead and keep the agreement because that's the truthful thing to do. Whether it's good policy or not. He'll act and deal truthfully because it's right. Whether this helps me or hurts me, I'll deal truthfully. End of discussion. We need to be people who are capable of living on the honor system. People known for our reputation of dealing and speaking truthfully no matter what. And that cuts very, very deeply into my life. I don't know how this affects you. My work, I put a lot of words on pages that other people read. I'm involved in a writing project that ultimately, if I live long enough to complete it, will involve 7 books. It will come in at over 1 million words if I finish it. That's a lot of words to have to answer for. God help me if any of those are not truthful. Every time I have a book that comes out, I go through a period of about 2 or 3 weeks of just utter agony Some would call it depression. Just serious agony of soul. The last time this happened, one of my brethren at home said, What's wrong with you, Gary? You've got a new book out. This is an exciting time. I said, yeah, I've just placed 165,000 words on the record that I'm going to have to answer for. And that's a serious stewardship. Won't go well with me if I've misled anybody. It's a serious thing. Let's not be flippant about it. We're committed to truth. That touches every department of our lives. Because certain forms of dishonesty in our world are thought to be so innocent and so harmless, I'm afraid it affects us as the Lord's people. I'll tell you what, if we will begin to practice radical honesty, I mean radical honesty that goes to the root of every area of life, you'll find yourself shining like a light in a dark world. The difference between the way you're conducting your life and the way almost everybody around you is conducting theirs will be obvious. You are operating with a different value system. And there'll be some light that will shine from that. Not many people use the King James anymore. But in the King James, the word honest was often a translation of the Greek word kalos, which in more recent translations is usually translated simply good. But the Greeks had more than one word for good, as most languages have synonyms. And kalos meant good not in the legal standpoint of that which is right, but good in the sense of that which is fine and praiseworthy. That which is not just right, but it has an attractive, charming quality to it. Well, it is interesting. In Matthew 5 and verse 16, a passage that we've noted several times in these studies, where Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talked about us being lights in the world. Matthew 5:16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your, New King James says, good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That's this Greek word kalos, which meant not good in the strictly legal sense of that which is just right, but that which is right, but it also is praiseworthy and fine and seen to be admirable by every right-thinking person. It's interesting that when Jesus says that when you do good works, your Father will be glorified, that the word for good that he uses is a word that in the older version was very often translated to honest. You know why? Because in 1611, it was understood that the leading example of the kind of goodness that he's talking about here is honesty. In 1611, that's what honesty meant. I believe even 400 years later, there's no more attractive, praiseworthy kind of goodness than honesty. A light shines from that almost is without peer. Almost nothing else you can do that would be good in the sense of Matthew 5 verse 16 any more than if you'll be an honest person. Some light that will shine from that will do a whole lot of good in this old dark world. Paul says in Titus chapter 2 and verse 10 that we are to adorn the doctrine of the Lord. We're to, by our lives, to exhibit not only that this is the right way, but that this is a good way, that this way works. This is the best way. And people can see by the way our lives are going that this is a better path than the one that I'm on. I believe we have a great opportunity in the matter of honesty to set that kind of example. By being people of radical truth in every thought, word, and deed, we will adorn the doctrine. People will see that this is different. This is not the way most people live. And it'll be an admirable, praiseworthy kind of goodness that will draw people to the God of truth. Because I'll tell you what, People who are not interested in truth, people who don't see that as admirable and something that would attract them, are not going to want to have anything to do with God in the first place, because God is a God of truth. If that won't draw somebody to God, then they're interested in a false God that's not the real God. So let's let truth shine from our lives, and those who are interested in the God of truth, who see that as praiseworthy, will be drawn to it. But that's enough for our lesson tonight. And these are, as has been said, practical matters. There's not anything fancy or philosophical about these concepts. They're very ordinary. But I believe because they are ordinary, they're within the reach of all of us. They're things that all of us can do, really without any further training. We already know how to do these things. But if we will do them, we will be lights in this world. And we will have the kind of influence the Lord was talking about in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16. But we want to conclude tonight with a song of invitation, a song in which we will allow anyone who needs to come to the front and let us know how we can help you in obeying the Lord. Whatever may be the step that you need to take, whatever it is that you need to do, depending on where you are in relationship to the gospel, our desire is to encourage you. We don't want to push you backward. We want to help you forward. If you can move forward in relationship to God tonight, and there's some way about that we can help you with, this is a time for you to come to the front and simply let us know how we can assist you. Won't you come to the front now as we stand and sing the invitation song?